Good evening, everyone. It's really a delight to be with you tonight. And thank you, Dave, for your lovely introduction. It's a beautiful hall, isn't it? Isn't it such a beautiful hall? And I was told it was actually a courtroom. And I think it's a rather interesting place to have a program called Living Without Regret. I don't know whether that was planned. But actually, as you heard, I grew up in Melbourne, and we all have a journey in life. And when I was just 20 years old, I actually went to university. I started studying architecture. But my heart wasn't in it at that time. And I took time out and I wandered the world for some years, which I often see as my education. And when you live in Australia, you're tucked right down in the bottom corner of the world. So I actually traveled right over to London overland. It took me a few years. And I ended up living in religious communities right the way through. I live with Buddhists and Sikhs and Muslims during Ramadan. I dipped my toes in the Ganges River, but that was about as far as I got. I went where the Dalai Lama lives, etc. And I was really on a search, I would say, and I settled in London. And the same thing was happening. I was looking around and I began to learn to meditate. And a little while later, began to learn to teach meditation. And it's always astounded me that I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor, but scratch the surface of almost all people. Deep down we carry so many regrets, if I can say, or feelings about the past. But we have no real tools or mechanism to manage them and deal with them. And I was just in my 20s at that time, and many times I would meet people in their 70s and 80s who'd carried a lifetime of regret, which I think is like a shadow that, overshadows and suppresses the real beauty and joy of life. And a little while ago I saw a cartoon. And it was an interesting cartoon because it had a man with a big zip right around his head. And a big hand came out of space and unzipped his head, lifted up his skull like a suitcase, and the camera went right into his mind. And it was quite fascinating because there was thousands of little scenes going on. People talking, people hugging, people listening, people fighting, people arguing. And I thought it was a great metaphor for life, really, that in the privacy of our own minds, we carry so many stories, don't we? Psychologists say that 70% of our thinking is about the past. I don't know really how they make those assumptions, but I wouldn't be surprised. And all this unfinished business, these unresolved stories, these regrets, really overshadow a quality of life. And yet I think that regrets are really a part of life. We all have them. In my experience, some of them go quickly. Some of them fade in time. You know how time sort of slowly heals the feeling? Some remain vivid in the memory, but the emotion associated seems to lessen and lessen in time. But some of them can really remain very strong. And one of the things I'm absolutely fascinated by in my spiritual anatomy, if I can use that language, is that all of us sit here so quietly, and yet in our subconscious we carry a whole record of our past. We sit so peacefully in the present, but recorded in our memory track are so many experiences. And some of them are incidents, some of them are mistakes, some of them are conflicts, some of them are decisions which actually have had a regretful effect on the quality of my life. My observation is that when they come back, they float up. You know how they sort of surface into your conscious mind. The result, we feel bad about ourselves. Our self-talk starts to put myself down. And when that regularly happens, what happens to the quality of my relationship with me? To me, the most intimate relationship in life is the one with me. And if I'm chronically sort of thinking, why did I do this? Why did I say this? It affects my sense of self and my self-esteem. It really damages the most important relationship in life. But before we actually begin tonight, I would love to just invite you for a little reflection, just a little reflective time. And I'm going to ask if we can just put down phones and books, but I think Dev did a good job with the phones. And I'm just going to speak a few thoughts. Excuse my throat. And we're just going to play some soft music, and I'm just going to ask you just to quietly reflect on the thoughts that are suggested. Let me sit very calmly, quietly, and just consciously feel your inner world settling down. My mind is like a sacred space. My whole world takes place in my mind. My mind is the meeting place of each part of my life. My thoughts, my feelings, my relationships, my memories. But there are gateways into my mind, my ears. I hear comments, I let them in my mind, and it drives my thinking. I see bad behavior. I let it through my eyes, and it drives my thinking. The outside world dictates what I think and feel inside. But there's also my memory. And sometimes memories bubble up from my deep subconscious and flood into the sacred space of my mind. Some memories so sweet, full of love and belonging, and the sacred space of my mind is filled with the perfume of joy. But sometimes regrets emerge, And instantly, sadness enters the sacred space of my mind. Just for a moment, imagine you are sitting in a theatre and watching the activity of your mind on the screen. You're the observer, watching all the thoughts and feelings on the screen of your mind. Emerge the feeling of regret, a regret that you've had, but just observe it. And let me ask my heart a question. How often do I invite this regret into the sacred space of my mind? How often do I invite this feeling into my inner world? And then ask your heart, as the observer of your mind, how much do I exaggerate this feeling? How much do I make it much bigger than it really is? How much do I amplify the sadness of what happened? And ask my heart, am I ready to let it go? Why do I hold on? Why do I repeatedly punish myself? For things that have happened in the past? At the heart of the spiritual journey is to begin a process of healing the stories, the memories, and the regrets that sit in my memory track. The more I heal inside, I experience true peace. Peace is my original and natural state. Thank you so much, everybody. I think tonight we're going to take a spiritual approach to this subject of learning to deal with regret and learn from regret. There's a woman who goes around the world giving talks called Don't Regret Regret. Don't regret having regrets. And I would say personally that I've actually learned so much in life from my regrets. Who feels they've learned a lot? Because your regrets actually help you do different actions and behaviors in the future. And I would say regret is an emotion experience when we think my present situation would be better or happier if I had done things differently in the past. That my present situation would be better or happier if I'd done things differently in my past. And as I was mentioning, I think our spiritual anatomy is something really extraordinary. And we carry this whole record of my past story, which just sits calmly in my memory track. But sometimes I think some of it is like red ink. You know, when you do the accounts and there's debts and it's shown in red, they're like outstanding feelings, outstanding unresolved experiences of the past, which emerge and are like a shadow over my present. But regret, I think, is like a part of a family of emotion. We can say guilt, which is probably even a much more intense emotional experience of regret. Shame is like the social aspect of the same thing. Not just a personalized feeling, but a shame that others, my circle of friends and family, will know what I've done or how I've behaved. Even remorse, I think, belongs to this family. They're all related and seem to be very good friends in many ways. But to me, there's three main types of regret. And the first perhaps is action and inaction. And often it's inaction which creates the most regret in life. And only recently I was in Canberra, which is the capital of the country I live in. And there was a man driving me somewhere, and he was telling me a story. He grew up in India. And he was in Delhi in 1984 when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. I think it was 1984, but it was around that time. And he said he was driving with his parents. He was a young boy with his two brothers in the back seat, his mum and dad in the front. And unfortunately, after she was assassinated, there was a lot of reprisals against people of a Sikh background because she was assassinated by a Sikh. And as they turned a corner, he said they saw a Sikh man running with a mob running behind him, after him. And unfortunately, many, many thousands died at that time. And so the boys in the back seat said, "Mum, Dad, stop, let's pick him up." And the mother immediately said, "No." And they drove off, and the man was caught by the mob and he died. And he said he and his brothers were so angry with their parents for doing that. But when he told me, there was a silence, and then he said, "But actually, if we had stopped, they probably would have killed all of us. So my mother was probably right." But you know, those inactions, those times in your life where you have a split second to decide, do I or don't I? And in Sydney, I've been teaching meditation in the main jail in Sydney. And once I went to a special prison, and this prison was created within the main prison to encourage the prisoners to behave well, better, reform character, that sort of thing. And they got privileges if they did that. And so I went along to teach meditation. There were 15 prisoners in this particular prison, and all turned up for meditation. I thought, that's fantastic. They're so interested in meditation. Then I learned they all got points for attending. So they were after the points because they got their privileges. But I'll never forget one man who spoke. And we began to share, our inner story. And he said that he was extremely articulate, incredibly articulate person. And he said he has a really terrible temper. In fact, he said, when I lose my temper, I go into a rage and I can't control myself and I killed somebody. And he said, you can't believe the regret I feel, obviously for the person I killed. But he said, a few seconds of my life have totally, few seconds have totally changed my life and that other person's life. So sometimes it's action or inaction we regret, and often it's inaction. And secondly, decisions are a big thing. And if you Google regret about decisions in life, the number one thing for most people is education. I took the wrong decision in education. I have an older brother who is a brilliant musician, classical and contemporary musician. He is one of those naturals. He could listen to music and just score it, just like that. And when he had children, he got married, he'd been to university, did a business degree. He needed money for the family, so he went into banking. And banking was like killing his soul, so to speak. And he regretted so deeply that he didn't follow his heart and live his life as a musician. But I think even more than that, the third type of regret is how I live my life and what sort of person I am really. And once I remember meeting a woman who would describe herself as she was a very lovely person, but quite a fearful and nervous person. And she got cancer. And I heard that she had become terminal. And I went to see her in hospital. And you know how sometimes scenes of life are so deeply imprinted? They're like recorded video recordings. Because it was sunset and I walked into her room and it was so dark and it was so still in her room. I tippy-toed in and I just sat down. I didn't say a word. And out of the dark, after a few minutes, a voice came. Her name was Lynn. And she said, "Charlie, I love you." And it was so uncharacteristic of this woman. And what happened was that once she knew she was terminal, it was like, I've got nothing to lose. I may as well be the person I've always wanted to be. So she was so loving. She was so expressive. And she said to me, I wish I'd lived my whole life. I really regret I didn't live as that person. Because so often our fears of what other people will think, if I'm really expressive, if I really express the love I really feel or the feelings for other people, we feel embarrassed. And so we hold back. And when you talk about this subject of regret, probably the main time many of us hold regret is around the death of a loved one. And I remember when my own mother died, one of my father's closest friends, within hours of her death, came over to counsel him. And you know what he said? I can remember. He said, now, don't think, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. He was actually an incredibly wonderful husband. But you know how the guilt kicks in, the regret kicks in, and you seem to remember the negatives rather than the positives. And my father said how incredibly helpful that was for him. Because I think often we regret not really expressing or being the person we want because of this society and all its, its norms that we feel may make me look a bit strange or peculiar. So my fears really hold me back. And it taught me a huge lesson. And this is why I think regret can be an amazing educator. Because it really told me when she told me this, the woman who was dying, it really taught me to really express my feelings now. And one of my friends who's from New Zealand, and she lives outside the country, She was only telling me recently that her father was unwell, and she decided to write him a letter of everything that she appreciated about him. She said it was a 6-page letter, the things she'd learned, the love he'd given her, so many different things. And she said, he wasn't a perfect father, but is there a perfect father? And he came back to her and said, that was the most beautiful gift of my whole life. And I often think, to put aside those fears, what will they think, what will they say, and do something. And sometimes at Christmas time or birthdays, what I do these days, I don't often give gifts, but I write letters about people's virtues, people's qualities. And honestly, they hit much deeper than a physical gift could ever do. And so there's different types, and yet when a regret kicks in, we go through instant phases. First, denial. Oh, I don't want it to happen, I want it to vanish, I want it to go away. A woman was telling me recently, she was in her workplace, and she's a human resources person, and she got an email about someone in the workplace whose performance was really poor. It was a fairly damning email. And she was sending it on to her boss, and she sent it to the person that it was about. Who sent an email like that in their life? And instantly she felt this. And then she said, she instantly had this denial and then this bewilderment. How could have I done this? How could have I done this? And then that self-punishment kicks in. I want to kick myself. That language, we want to punish myself for that behavior. And then it goes on a loop, that thinking. Why, and that punishing thinking. The result, the short term is that really regretful feeling, but the long term is the damage it does to my relationship with myself. Because the whole healing of regret is really rebuilding my relationship with me. And I feel these days there's 3 forms of wisdom we all need in life. And they're fairly fashionable today. The first is my intellectual ability, my IQ. It's that part of me that helps me come to a university like this, get a good education, make money, do that. But when I feel guilty, when I feel afraid, when I feel depressed, does that intelligence help? I don't think so. There's emotional intelligence, which is the intelligence to build rich, loving relationships with others. An incredibly important wisdom. But once again, if there are regrets in relationships, I'm not sure how much it really helps. But spiritual intelligence, if emotional intelligence is the wisdom to build rich, loving relationships with others, spiritual intelligence is the wisdom to build a rich, loving relationship with me. The first relationship in life is with me. When that relationship is dysfunctional, it pollutes each and every part of my life. Not only how I feel, it affects my physical health. There's a lot of data on that. It will affect my performance in the workplace. It will affect my relationships. And I would say that spiritual intelligence is it's this wonderful education, this inner education. And sometimes I think we are so educated about the world outside, but so uneducated about the world inside. It's a paradox, don't you think? Why is the world like this? And I think spiritual intelligence is the wisdom to know who I am, experience who I am, and build in tools and processes to manage my inner world. So that when the inevitable chronic negative thinking happens, or the self-doubt kicks in, or the regrets come, I at least have an avenue of building myself back into a positive state. And with all the wisdom in the world, I feel the most important question in life is, who am I? And when I think of that question, I think that most of us have 3 personalities inside. I would say 2 of them contribute to a personality that accrues regrets and negative memories, and 1 of them begins to heal and take me out. The first personality I call the I of arrogance, or the I of superiority. And this personality is born out of my temporary identity, my body. I see myself as a whole series of labels. Mahatma Gandhi once said, labels are for jars, they're not for people. But I think we label. How quick do we label each other? How long does it take? And when my ego is ruling my inner system, I have a whole thinking, feeling, behavioral structure. I compare, and I think, I am better, I know more, I am right. But when it comes into my feelings, that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. Anyone here sensitive? I'm impressed with Boston. I think we're all a bit sensitive, aren't we? But what it's really saying is, when the false I rules my inner system, it gives birth to all these emotions, and one of them is regret. And I have regret about outcomes because I'm attached to how things should be. I'm so attached that my job should be like this, or people should respect me, people should praise me. And when it doesn't happen, I have regret in the form of anger and resentment. So when the wrong I is ruling my inner system, it starts to produce a lot of regret in my life. But my experience is the I of arrogance, the I of superiority, is a front for the second I. You know, that confident me, but behind that confident me is that vulnerable me, you know, that little vulnerable me that... And this I call the I of lack of self-respect, or the I of inferiority. This I also takes its whole identity from my temporary body. And this I compares and thinks others are better, others know more. Others don't love me. Others don't respect me. Others don't value me. Sometimes goes round and around in my head. But when it filters into my emotions, when this I rules my inner system, that's when I sometimes feel hopeless about myself, inadequate, inferior, unworthy. Honestly, my life experience is that we can present so well, be so confident on the surface, and yet underneath the surface we can feel so hopeless sometimes about ourselves. There seems to be an epidemic. And depression sits here too. In psychology, a depression is like a sadness that my dream in life to be loved and valued and respected hasn't really happened. But in spirituality, depression is like a mourning for the loss of my true identity. I'm living my life, but who am I really? Because when my lack of self-respect rules my inner system, I make a little mistake. I just say a few wrong words and I beat myself up. I have so much regret. I can't let it go, and it begins to reinforce in my head I'm not a good person. And I carry so many regrets about my life. I overreact to myself. So it's like sow the seed of a false identity, and it starts to grow a tree of guilt, regret, shame, and all these feelings. But what spirituality says is to begin to nurture what I call the original I. The original I, the permanent self, is the soul. The soul is just a point of consciousness which resides in the front of the brain. And to me, the soul is an absolute wonder. The soul exists, but it has no physical size. In mathematics, they describe a point. It exists, but has no length, breadth, or width. So I am a soul. And the soul is the consciousness which sits in the center of the forehead and acts through the body. And when I begin to reflect on who I am, it's like I come home to a place inside where I feel so easy about myself. I take the pressure off myself to look good, be noticed, impress people, and I just really begin to accept myself. And my own experience is that when I try to get a sense of self-value from temporary things, my workplace, my looks, it's so fragile and it doesn't really hold. But when I reconnect with my permanent self, it starts to create a more permanent sense of self-value. My self-respect begins to grow back, and I would say there's almost a spiritual law. The stronger your self-respect, the less you will regret things which happen around you. And so when I really begin to experience myself as I really am, then it starts to kick in some new behaviors or new states of mind. And I would say that one is my relationship with my conscience. And I think that's an incredibly important relationship, because I sometimes think of my conscience like a vessel of truth. My truth, my values, my principles sit in my conscience. What happens when you don't listen to your conscience? What happens? Is there a greater pain than that? Can there be a greater disrespect for myself than to ignore my truth? Because my ego or my desires pull me away, I perform actions against the principles or the values which are important to me. How am I going to feel about myself? I was once running a seminar in a country in Africa, and it was for government officials. And one man spoke to me, and he said to me that he wanted to send his children to England for education, and he didn't make enough money. So he took bribes. And he said, I took bribes for years and years. My children went to England. My children have a good education. My children are well settled. Everything's good. But in his own words, he said, I've ruined my own life. He said, I'm riddled with regret and guilt, and my fear that my community will find out what happened. So when we compromise my conscience, we actually compromise the quality of my life. And I feel that my conscience in one way can be my own best friend or my own worst enemy. It's my worst enemy when I give in to my desires and my ego and I perform those actions. But actually it can become my friend. You know, when you're about to say something or do something and that something just says, hold on, be careful. It's like a little red light goes off inside and actually warns you not to put that into action because later you may regret. And so as I begin to rebuild my sense of self as a spiritual being, I actually begin to develop, I'd say, a healthy relationship with my conscience. But even as we go deeper into the understanding of myself, I would say that the soul is an overname for three aspects of consciousness. my mind, which is my thinking power. So my mind collects data through my sense organs. I see things, I hear things, and it's thrown up on the screen, just like the screen behind here. Then the intellect. The intellect is that part assessing the information. Just like I'm speaking at the moment, a part of you is saying, I agree with that. I don't agree with that. You know, that part of you judging and assessing everything which is being said. Then the intellect makes a decision. We act. And every action leaves an impression in my subconscious. Who am I? I am the accumulation of millions of past behaviors that sit in my subconscious. Many of them have the capacity to be so loving, so kind, so sweet. But some are habitual patterns of anger or reaction or whatever, judgment. And as I begin to know myself, I begin to understand these habitual patterns which sit in my memory track. And this is why I'm on the spiritual journey, so that I can bring change in myself. So the more change I bring, the less I react and the less guilt that really begins to emerge in my life. Even, I would say, the law of cause and effect, the law of action and reaction. You know, this is one of the universal laws that science and spirituality have some happy relationship with. You know, this law says that if I throw a ball against a wall, it comes back with virtually equal force. Every single day, we throw our thoughts, words, and actions into life, and we reap the fruit of those thoughts, words, and actions. We throw them out there, and we receive the effect of them. And when we begin to understand this law, we begin to prepare or look a bit further down the track, not to do actions now that are really going to make me regret things much later. But I think, where do I really get the inner strength to be able not to let the mind just fall into those feelings of regret? And this is why really meditation is first, I would say, 3 loving relationships, or there's 3 sources of love. First, I would say myself. Second, God. And thirdly, my family and friends. For most of us, not much love coming to me from me, you know? And a lot of us, God, we're not sure what that's about. A lot of people have faith in God, but perhaps don't really feel love from God. My one source of love is my family and friends. When there's a loss in life, there's a conflict, it's like my whole life goes into upheaval. What is spirituality? Spirituality is really beginning to have a loving relationship with myself as a soul, and a loving relationship with God as the Supreme Soul. And we search, I often feel we search for true love. We invest my heart in relationships. It's the most natural thing to do. But there's a huge human dilemma, and that is that no relationship is permanent. No relationship is permanent, whether it's time, whether it's change, whether it's conflict, whether it's separation. No relationship is permanent. And the whole basis of spirituality is exploring a relationship which is permanent, the relationship of the soul with the Supreme Soul. And I often think that I'm a soul. I think you can see me. I sit in the forehead, but you can see me expressing through my eyes and my face. But God, I would say, is a soul too, a conscious soul, a living being, not a concept or a belief, but a real living soul. And in a sense, these days when I talk about these things, if I was to say to meditate, because when you meditate, you have the power to do the actions you really want. That meditation is to focus your mind. Is it easy to focus your mind? Is it easy to concentrate? Everyone's shaking their heads. I got more reaction to that question than So all we do, the most natural thing of human consciousness is to remember. At every millisecond, you are remembering. You are remembering what you have to do, what you did, what's being said. You are constantly remembering. And when you remember, three things are happening. You plug into a thought. The instant you touch that thought, you're influenced. And you download a feeling into your mind. So if you're sitting here now and you remember a family member that you really love, you get on well with, you have a good relationship, this millisecond, the subtle thread of your remembrance, your intellect touches them, you feel good and you download well-being, happiness into your mind. If you're sitting here and in a split second you remember someone you're having conflict with, you're not getting on, the instant you remember, you touch, you plug in, or it's like you click on a website, you start to download the data into the sacred space of your mind of that unhappiness, that dis-ease. And if you really look at life, we're sitting here so quietly, and yet the thread of your consciousness is traveling. It's beyond time and space. It can go back in time 10 years, 20 years, and feel every feeling of a situation. You know, the whole situation emerges in your mind. Or you can travel to the other side of the world, remember a loved one, connect with them, and instantly download that feeling into your mind. And this is why really the logic of meditation is to remember a source that's full of everything I need. A source that is unlimited in peace and love and power. Because today what happens, I'm sitting here, but I dwell on my regrets. I dwell on my mistakes. It's like, how am I going to feel? To me these days, if someone says, I'm not happy, I'm not feeling good, my question is, what are you remembering? What are you plugging your mind into? And often we plug it in and we leave it plugged in for hours and hours to an unhappy, remorseful, regretful situation or relationship, and then we wonder why I'm not happy. The logic here is to begin to know and experience who I am and remember like a lover of the soul, a real living relationship. But it's just done on a subtle thread through my mind and connection. You know, once some people think, well, that's a bit too intangible. I had a friend in Germany many years ago, and she was a psychologist, and she did an experiment about telepathy. And she and another psychologist, they lived in two different cities, and they actually kept books, and they synchronized their watches. And whenever they thought of each other, they wrote it down to the second. And after a few months, she said, when they compared notes, she said 60 to 70% was accurate. Because each time you think, it's like a little thought message. The thought energy is such a powerful energy, but we have lost the awareness of it. So when I spend my life plugging into the past, plugging into regrets, plugging into problems, what will be the quality of my life? And here what we begin to do is plug in to my eternal self, the soul, and I plug into peace. And then I plug my mind into the form of the Supreme Soul, the form of light. I connect and I start to plug into a quality of love. This gives me so much internal power to put a full stop when my mind wants to visit the past and punish myself for what I've done or what I've said or what's happened. No, I now have more self-respect and I now have an inner strength to stop that habitual pattern. And when you get that power, I think a few other things begin to kick in. That I can be totally honest with myself. And when I'm totally honest with myself, I can say, yes, I did do this. Yes, it was wrong. But now I'm going to let it go. So I'm not in denial. I'm not trying to avoid my behavioral actions of the past. I'm starting to clear up the accounting in the database of my consciousness, clear those feelings. And if I've made a mistake, I can apologize. Apologies can diffuse so much. If I've made a mistake with another person I regret, for me, I will definitely go to that person and say, I'm really sorry. Sometimes our ego wants to hold back. And a friend of mine was telling me that he had a falling out with one of his closest friends. And they didn't speak for 10 years. And when he began his spiritual journey, he wanted to resolve that. He wanted to heal that. But when he rang his friend wouldn't answer his calls. And so he thought about it and he tried through other friends, still wouldn't answer. And then when he really looked at it honestly, what he was really thinking inside was that, he was saying, let's heal, let's resolve things, let's heal the past, let's just be good friends again. But deep down he still thought, I was right and you were wrong. You know how we do that? On the surface we say, let's get over it, let's be friends again, but still I hold this thought. And you know what he said? He did meditation for a period of time and he let go this thought and his friend answered his call. And I think that ego which we sometimes hold, that I am right and you are wrong, apology can also clear the account of regret as well. But one of the greatest acts of spirituality, I would say, in the journey of spirituality, which is this wonderful journey of self-learning and self-healing, is self-forgiveness. And sometimes all of us have a shopping list of things that I've done that I hold against myself. I would say that probably has more effect on the quality of your life than anything else. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is letting go all the conditions in my mind that stop me being loving. Each time I can't forgive myself, I can't love myself. You've done that, you won't receive love. You've done that, you can't be loved. So this most intimate relationship of life, me with me, this is my whole life stems from this first relationship. And if it's unhealthy, as I was saying, it will absolutely influence everything. My own belief, the world we see out there, what is our world like today? I believe it's the result of this first relationship. When there's 7 billion human souls having a dysfunctional relationship with themselves, what sort of planet? If I can't respect me, am I going to respect you? Am I going to respect society? Am I going to respect others? Am I going to respect the environment? I don't think so. And this is where spirituality begins, by really beginning to understand that when I am under the influence of my ego and lack of self-respect, I do wrong actions. And when I do wrong actions, I regret them. But I was ignorant. Now, as I begin to know who I am, I won't do those actions in the future, but I have a context for understanding my past, and I begin to heal and resolve the past. And this is why I feel these days that what sort of world we have, what sort of atmosphere is in our world wherever you go. I find if we don't have a spiritual practice, if you're not caring for the sacred space of your mind, if you're not creating a quality of thought and feeling, what happens? You absorb the atmosphere of the world. If you look at all the data, anxiety and depression is absolutely going through the roof. And so if I don't do something for me on a regular basis, what happens is I wake up and I'm just not feeling very good because I'm absorbing this atmosphere of 7 billion plus souls pumping out these feelings of anxiety, depression, regret, and so on. And this is where I feel meditation is an extraordinary tool. You can do it as a hobby, which means, when you feel like it, you meditate, it's good. You can do it as a discipline like exercise. And I find a lot of people meditate, but as soon as they stop meditating, their mind reverts to their old thinking. We go back to my old mindset. Today, what works is when I do it like a lifestyle. It's like I put a little structure into my life to sustain myself, to care for my mind, my conscience, my inner world. I think it's an act of love for myself. And meditation, as I was saying earlier, is really just turning my intellect and remembering the right things which download such a positive atmosphere into my mind. My experience is we don't have to really worry too much about individual regrets, because when I live a spiritual life, as my self-respect improves, almost automatically I don't overreact to regrets and I don't hold on to regrets, and the account of regret becomes less and less. So I think I should put a pause button on myself and we're going to finish with some meditation in just a few moments, but if anyone would like to ask something, or you'll be most welcome. If anyone would like to ask a question, make a comment, please feel free.
Thank you for sharing this beautiful message. My question comes from the place where the quote, every blessing comes with a burden, and if you don't follow through with a blessing, you kind of have this regret. My question for you is, how do you fully embrace, like Joseph Campbell says, that rapture of being alive, taking that call to the hero's journey without having the regret of, well, could you really do it? What if you don't accomplish it? All that other low vibrational kind of like concerns. Thank you.
I think that one of the most powerful obstacles is fear. And some say there's two prime emotions, love and fear. We all know how absolutely paralyzing fear is, but how is life transforming is love. And I think that my experience since I've been meditating is quite a change in my whole outlook. And one thing that I feel contemporary life, we invest in everything temporary. everything is temporary. It's like it's temporary jobs and, if I can say, temporary relationships. Everything is temporary, and it builds up so much fear and insecurity that just takes the joy out of life. And spirituality has a different approach. And I remember once I was in London at the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris. The Brahma Kumaris have a huge place there, and John Cleese came to speak. You know John Cleese? Don't know whether you do. He's a comedian, the Monty Python person. Maybe you're not. Anyway, he came to talk about impermanence, and he gave this example of life is like a train journey. Life is the train, and the train stops at a station. People hop on the train, people hop off the train. The next station, people hop on, people hop off. Eventually you hop off the train. You know, the most natural process of life is change. As they say, the only permanent thing is change. But as soon as we become insecure and I attach my heart to anything temporary, I build so much fear, insecurity into my life. And so the whole wonder of life is lost in this chronic anxiety, the fear of loss, and the ultimate fear really being the loss, I think often not just my body, but the identity that I've built up. You know, sometimes I've had the thought, I'm born, and I say, this is my mum, this is my dad, these are my brothers, these are my sisters, you know, this is my country, this is my town, this is my partner, these are my kids, this is my career, this is my house. You think this huge network, in 1 second it goes. A lifetime of investment. And that fear is just such a huge fear. And what spirituality says is understand the continuity of all that. We should love life. Let's love relationships, love people, put my heart, but know that I am the soul. The soul is that part which has lived before this temporary set of labels I sit in now, and the soul will continue after this temporary set of labels. And it's almost like as I build in a new perspective, I think I can really understand that life will mean change. And ultimately, you know, the wisdom is to enjoy everything. But the second I attach my heart, you know, that's where so much fear and insecurity comes. I have a friend in Australia who's a medical scientist, and I was talking to him once about the soul and the body, the self. And the soul has no gender, religion, all that stuff, all the labels. You think of all the conflict in life. But he banged his knee like this and he said, feels solid, doesn't it? I mean, when you bang your knee, does it feel solid? He was just saying, according to science, your body is 99.999% space. It's really just a hologram. It's like a temporary hologram. But when I forget who I am, and I become so absorbed in this temporary identity, and then the two children it creates, my ego and lack of self-respect, just dominate my perception. So I come to a point in life I'm just so full of regrets and sadness and hurts and pain because the seed of my thinking has been false. I'm actually a permanent soul. I'm not a temporary body. And spirituality, meditation, is really converting this idea into an experience, because the natural state of the self is peace. And I often say to people that, you know, when you meditate, you don't have to sit down and psych yourself up, you know, I must relax, you know. You actually, all you have to do is know and experience who you are, and the automatic byproduct is this incredible fragrance in your mind where you a mind at rest. Is there a sweeter experience in life today? Really, can there be a sweeter experience? I don't think. Any one of us can do it. And what I do, I wake up every single morning, and wherever I am, and I just sit in meditation. And my aim is to create a fragrance in my mind that all my actions and behaviors come out of that place throughout the day. Not always perfect, but yeah.
Hello. Hello. So one of the things I wanted to ask was, you did mention something about not identifying or trying to cut from the negative thoughts that your mind creates in those moments, and trying to remember.
Can you just hold a little closer? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yes.
Sure.
Better,
Okay.
Thank you.
So one of the things that you said particularly was like one of the things particularly I want to talk about is your mind. So in this practice that you're starting out, for example, in the spiritual journey, it's not so easy, at least for me, from my experience, in those moments when you're in the heat of the moment, when the emotion takes over. When you're saying it like this, it feels good, it feels nice. You talk very sweetly and it's all sounding good, but in the heat of the moment, when the emotion takes you over, it's hard for you to just get back and not give in to those thoughts or emotions which seem negative when you look back after it is done. But it is done in that moment, just like that. How do you, is there I know it takes a lot of practice for you to eventually be at that point where you can step back and see, okay, it's not me, it's a negative self, and I need to not give in to this. But then to get there, how can a person stay motivated and see that it's going to be like that? For me at least, my experience, the emotion takes over, for example, in terms of anger, you snap back.
Emotions, as we all know, are so powerful, but at that moment to try to suppress an emotion is almost impossible. You feel it coming, anger or hurt. It's there before you can even think. And that's why, in a sense, spirituality is like preventative medicine. Because I often think negative emotions, like in a family, if mum and dad don't have a good relationship, conflict, it affects the children, right? If I don't have a healthy relationship with myself, in terms of my ego, it produces the children of negative emotion. And that's why when the seed of yourself, if I can say, is false, of who I am as a temporary body, it will grow all sorts of negative emotion. To go to the seed of change, if I sow the seed of myself as a spiritual being, it starts to grow the emotions of peace. And when my nature is more peaceful, it's less likely that I'll be influenced, by my negative side. Like I was saying, I think that in psychology they say, do something 20 times, it becomes a habit. So we have all these psychological habits of reaction. But as you meditate, you create positive habits too. It's like you start to reinforce the positive emotions. And this is why this doesn't happen overnight. The spiritual journey isn't something which just happens instantly. It's an investment in quality of life. And I, observing myself, feel that, the nature for most of us is, one day you're up, the next day you're down, right? One day, 1 hour you're up, the next hour you're down. Sometimes 1 minute you're up and the next minute. That's the nature. But because we're like dancing to the tune of the external world, we're empty. And so we're looking to the external world, and according to the atmosphere, it dictates how I think and feel. When you meditate, you are creating the thoughts you want. You're taking back the authority of your mind, not with force or control, but with wisdom and love. And as you do that patiently over a period of time, you start to govern more your internal world. So you're not such a victim of your emotions. But it definitely takes patience. But I can only say from my own experience, I've meditated, I think, every day for the last 40 years, and I've changed enormously in that way and feel less a victim of those tsunami of emotions that just come over you. And then often you do or say things you really regret much later on. So it's a long-term solution rather than an instant solution, I would say. Maybe we can have one more question and then we'll have some meditation, I think.
Thanks for such a lovely talk. The question I have is, you talked about 3 relationships: relationship with your own self, relationship with your family, and then relationship with God. So what I feel that all the relationships develop through experiences. What can I do that I can expedite or deepen my experiences with God?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And, when I first get to know who I am as a soul, I would say the first step of meditation is that self-awareness, learning to move beyond your labels, your gender, your nationality, your education, and become the soul. The Supreme Soul is a living soul like you, a conscious living soul, but a soul that's unlimited in the qualities you want, a soul that doesn't experience happiness and sorrow like a human soul, a soul that's full. But I often think it's like the Supreme Soul's on the FM wavelength. And when I forget who I am and think I'm a temporary body, I'm on the AM wavelength. I can believe in God. Many people have a belief, but I can't connect or tune in and get the strength. So to really have the real experience, I've got to go up to the FM wavelength. And that's why the more you practice and live in the state of self-awareness or soul consciousness, the more the reality of that relationship comes. And like I was saying, that, you pick up thoughts all the time as you've been sitting here. All sorts of people have popped in your mind. You've received their thought messages. It's a real living connection, but it does take practice. And what I do when I wake up in the morning is I sit down and I become soul conscious. And really, the more you become soul conscious, the speed of your thinking cools down. There's this lovely feeling of your inner world settling. And I sit in front of the image of, I'm just checking it's there, the image of light, and I allow myself to be completely loved. Completely loved. Nothing heals the human soul. And if I am sitting in front of this divine love and I can't feel it, that's wisdom. What is blocking it? And I can tell you mostly it's our deep addiction to unworthiness. I'm not good enough. This sort of lack of self-respect doesn't allow me to feel that. The more I remove that, it's like a thought away, I can experience the divine. It's just a thought away. It takes practice, but it's absolutely possible. And it means that as you go about your life, you don't have to sit specifically. When your mind plugs into an unhappy memory or regret, you go back there. You keep training yourself to go back, and it makes a huge difference to the quality of life. And I'm going to ask you to experiment if you feel comfortable. We meditate with eyes open. And many years ago, I was actually in San Francisco, and they were actually doing a study on meditation. And you know, in the last 3 years, they've done 3,000 scientific studies on meditation. Meditation is the flavor of the month. Why? Because the human mind, as we all know, is in such a state. And in this meditation, the scientist was interested, okay, you can meditate, you can relax, you can calm down. But when you go back into stressful situations, in the family, in the workplace, does your mind just revert, or do you carry the feelings of meditation? And so I was one of her guinea pigs, and I had to sit in this little room, and I had electrodes sort of attached to me, and she told me to meditate. She recorded my brain waves. Then she told me to sleep, and it's something I'm quite skilled at. And she recorded my brain waves, and then she gave me all these problems to do. And I had to give her answers, and I meditate with my eyes open. And what she said was, those who meditate with their eyes open carry their peaceful state of being, their calm state, into their practical life. And this is really what I think most of us want. Most of us want to marry this meditation and spiritual practice with my practical life and responsibilities. It's absolutely possible. It is possible. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we'll I know there were some other questions, but I'm happy to talk afterwards if anyone would like to. But I think we'll finish with a few minutes of meditation. Would that be okay? It's okay? For these few minutes, let me experiment with keeping my eyes open and gently resting my vision on the image of light in front. The first step of meditation is to know and experience who I am. Just visualize yourself as the tiny soul, the spark of consciousness sitting in the front of the brain and the center of the forehead. I am the permanent self, acting through my temporary body. Just feel yourself gently stepping back from all the labels of your body. What I do, my role as a parent, a friend, and even the image of your body, your gender, your age. Just feel this lovely letting go, stepping back. And just feel yourself so lightly in the forehead. I, the eternal calm soul. I am a peaceful soul. And in this state of self-awareness, I turn to the divine, the Supreme Soul, the one relationship that's permanent. A soul that's an ocean of peace, an ocean of unlimited love. And just feel yourself like a child. Filling yourself with this divine love. Keep your mind focused towards this point source and feel the stream of pure love entering the core of your being. This is the highest union of the mind. And the more I give my self permission to feel this love, I feel a deep healing process inside. My self-respect begins to grow. And in this self-respect, the past looks different. The mistakes are not so bad. The regrets are not so big. I'm stepping back into my self-value. If each morning I wake, and before my mind goes into overdrive of what has to be done, I sit down quietly, reconnect with my true self, and link with the divine. I begin to take my inner strength back. To meditate regularly is an act of love for myself. To meditate regularly is an act of love for myself.